not worrisome. That's how the Pope's right-hand man describes explosive accusations made against the Pope. Targeting clergy. A new report says Russian hackers indicted by the U.S. also took aim at Orthodox Church leaders. Final tributes. People in Arizona say goodbye to the late Senator John McCain as his body heads to Washington, D.C. And a grande achievement. How coffee from a shop in Mexico is providing a jolt to some senior citizens. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 30th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Vatican's second-in-command is dismissing allegations of sex abuse cover-up against Pope Francis. Cardinal Pietro Parolin says the Holy Father is serene and the crisis sparked by a former diplomat making a stunning accusation is not at all worrisome. The Vatican Secretary of State made the comments in an interview with La Stampa, an Italian daily. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, you learned a Vatican investigation into these allegations by Archbishop Vigano won't happen. Tell us what you know.
That's right, Lauren. A high-ranking Vatican official tells me not to expect an investigation anytime soon and not to expect the Vatican to issue a statement from the Pope for the time being. But Lauren, as we saw in the case of the Chile clergy sex abuse crisis, the Pope trusted his advisors and didn't go public until the outcry in the media and among the faithful became so loud that he had no option but to launch an investigation. Now, the Vatican would seem to be waiting for this to blow over. Now, there is, though, growing pressure, not just from the media, but from sex abuse victims, as well as at least 7 American bishops, and they're asking for transparency and for answers from leadership. Now, if that pressure keeps up, we could see the Pope taking steps.
Well, and the Pope's right-hand man, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is named in the Vigano testimony, is speaking out. Tell us what he said.
Yeah, the Vatican Secretary of State says the allegations against the Pope have caused, quote, great pain, but they haven't changed the Vatican's day-to-day workflow. Parolin also says the Pope seems calm, and even though there is a bitterness and unease, the Pope is at peace, he said. He also hopes that everyone involved searches for truth and justice, but he said that in Italian, quote, la situazione non è per nulla preoccupante, which means the situation is not at all worrisome.
Did the journalist who conducted this interview with Parolin about the accusations in the report talk about the fact that Parolin was said to be complicit in covering up McCarrick's misdeeds?
Well, Cardinal Parolin told reporter Andres Beltramo that it's best not to go into detail about those issues. He said, repeat what the Pope said, read what was written and make your own judgment. The statement by Vigano speaks for itself. These are his words. And Parolin is mentioned a couple of times, Lauren, as we know in the 11-page letter, in reference to claims that sanctions had been imposed on McCarrick under Benedict XVI, but that they had not been enforced neither by the Pope Emeritus nor by Francis himself.
There have been a few reports of the Pope's reaction. Tell us what the Italian media has been saying about this latest interview.
Well, Italy's state news agency ANSA reported earlier this week that the Pope was embittered, but the newspaper run by the Italian Catholic Bishops' Conference, Avvenire, is reporting that the Pope is not bitter and is back to work at the Vatican and that it's business as usual. So there are conflicting reports, and we'll continue to pursue this story with updates as they come in from the Holy See Press Office, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Many survivors of clergy sex abuse are demanding action. One national group, often at odds with the church, is seizing the moment, holding a press conference here in Washington at the Vatican Embassy. The group says it wants to see secret files about former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick referenced in that explosive testimony by Archbishop Vigano. Correspondent Jason Calvi has the story from the embassy.
My name is Becky Ianni.
Becky Ianni says she was abused by Monsignor William Renicky when she was 8. According to the Washington Post, he killed himself in 1992. after other allegations of abuse, but it took Ianni 40 years to admit what happened to her.
Once you start talking about it, you don't feel so guilty anymore. I think the thing that you deal with most of survivors is shame and guilt. And getting out there and talking to other survivors and feeling like you're not alone, that's what heals you.
Ianni is a regional director of SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. The national group says they support women and men wounded by clergy sex abuse, and often they challenge the church.
So I'm going to rely on the secular authorities. I want every citizen to contact their attorney general and demand them launch an investigation into the Catholic diocese in their area.
Earlier this week, a former Vatican ambassador to the United States who served here from 2011 to 2016 made shocking allegations of sex abuse cover-up against Pope Francis and other leaders. In Archbishop Vigano's explosive testimony, he says all of the memos, letters, and documentation he refers to in his letter are found at the Secretary of State at the Vatican, as well as this building behind me. It's the papal nunciature. It's where the Pope's nuncio, his eyes and ears in the United States, lives and works. In the letter, Vigano writes 80% of the abuses found were committed against young adults by homosexuals. Peter Isley, co-founder of SNAP, is critical of Vigano because he says Vigano links homosexuality with sexual abuse.
A certain faction in the hierarchy seems to believe that the problem is sexual orientation.
You're criticizing him. Won't that then stop other whistleblowers from coming forward in the future?
All we know is that he's making allegations and that he says these are based on documented proof. If you're going to blow the whistle, you should bring the documents.
SNAP faces major criticism. Their former development director suing them, calling the organization a sham. She says their mission is to find victims, to bring those victims to lawyers. Those lawyers then sue for major settlements with dioceses and then give kickbacks back to SNAP. Reporting here in Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington, who is under fire for not doing enough to punish abusers as Bishop of Pittsburgh, is speaking out in a letter to priests here in his archdiocese. He writes, "I ask you, as I did at the cathedral, for prayers for me, for forgiveness for my errors in judgment, for my inadequacies, and also for your acceptance of my contrition for any suffering I have caused, as well as the grace to find with you ways of healing, ways of offering fruitful guidance in this darkness." More than 4 prominent Catholic women are asking the Holy Father for answers. They wrote a letter, and that letter says, in part, quote, this is to His Holiness, "To your hurting flock, Pope Francis, your words are inadequate. We need leadership, truth, and transparency. We, your flock, deserve your answers now." Doctors, journalists, and professors signed the appeal, and they conclude by saying, in short, we are the church, every bit as much as the cardinals and bishops around you. Joining me now is Mary Rice Hassan, director of the Catholic Women's Forum at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She's an author. She is the author of the letter. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much.
You just heard Cardinal Parolin describe the situation as not worrisome. What is your response?
He's not listening to the people. And after talking with so many women over the past couple of weeks, but especially in the past week, that's what drove me to write this letter. And right now, over 6,000 women in a matter of hours have signed this letter. And the letter says, we want answers.
Let's talk about that. You say there are questions that need to be answered. There doesn't need to be an investigation, but you say these are the things that need to be addressed. Tell us what that is.
So certainly there needs to be a big, broad investigation about all the things surrounding Cardinal McCarrick. Our point is that when the Pope was asked directly about the accusations about his knowledge and his behavior, he demurred. He decided not to answer that. And so what we're saying is, we don't need an investigation. We need your answers, Holy Father.
In your letter, you quote Pope Francis saying, he seeks a more, this is what he said, these are his words, a more incisive female presence in the church, and that women are capable of seeing things with a different angle from men with a different eye. How would you like to see the church incorporate women into the investigation and the question and answer process?
Well, so first of all, we want to hear answers. We want to hear what the church knows that they're not telling. And that starts with the Holy Father. That means the bishops as well. And I applaud Cardinal DiNardo for his statement on behalf of the USCCB, requesting an investigation and opening this up. But women want to know the truth. We want the answers because it's our sons who are going to the seminary. You know, it's our brothers who are the priests. And so this matters to women greatly. And so I was really troubled to hear the words of Cardinal Parolin. This is not business as usual.
Mary Rice Hassan, director of the Catholic Women's Forum at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, author of A Letter to His Holiness. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Later in the show, we'll talk to the president of a Catholic university who is calling for the attacks against the Holy Father to stop. Now, for continuing coverage of the sex abuse crisis, follow EWTN News Nightly online and visit our partners, the Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register. Mourners gather for the funeral of Senator John McCain in Phoenix, Arizona.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to feel.
Former Vice President Joe Biden delivered a eulogy, as did Larry Fitzgerald, a wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. Around 3,500 people attended. McCain's body left Arizona and is headed for the U.S. Capitol, where it will lie in state. The Archdiocese of San Juan, Puerto Rico, has filed for bankruptcy. It comes after retired Catholic school teachers sued the church for their pensions. A lawyer for the Archdiocese says it can't pay its bills and has halted all charity work. It's relying on a group of volunteers. A rift between Russia and Ukraine threatens to tear the Orthodox Church apart. Tensions remain high after an investigation reveals Russian hackers spent years trying to hack email accounts of senior Orthodox leaders. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Officials here could have a tougher time trying to mediate a years-long conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This new extensive report lays out how the same Russian hackers who meddled in the U.S. election also went after religious figures in Ukraine and Turkey. The stakes are high as Kiev and Moscow wrestle over the future of Christianity in Ukraine. Religious leaders are trying to figure out how to move forward after their privacy was breached. The Associated Press has been mining data from thousands of emails for months, uncovering the culprits who tried to steal private correspondence. The probe found it's the same group of 12 Russians indicted in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation.
This hit list, effectively, ranges from people in Washington, military and intelligence folks, to journalists in Russia, and now, as we've seen, religious figures in Istanbul.
That includes top aides to Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I, who is often described as the first among equals among Eastern Orthodox leaders. The Istanbul-based patriarch is considering a request from Ukraine to sever ties between the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church.
The Ukrainian Church is on its way towards independence. This is a major political concern for Russia, and many other churches are involved in this situation because at the later stage, the recognition of the Ukrainian Church by other churches will be important.
The armed conflict between Ukrainian military forces and Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine is adding to the tension. Despite the separation of church and state, experts say many Russian clergy members are connected to the FSB, the country's spy agency. The Russian Orthodox Church says it has no information about the hacking and declined to comment further. The Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill, is supposed to meet next week with the Patriarch Bartholomew in Istanbul to talk about the religious rift. The Kremlin denies Russia has done anything wrong or been involved in any way with the hacking, but the State Department officials here dispute that. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Russia is testing its updated missile defense system. Yesterday, we reported that Russia is preparing for major military drills in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, according to its defense ministry, Russia will deploy 25 ships and 30 jets for those exercises next week. There is a lot more coming up on EWTN News Nightly tonight, including an interview with Jim Toohey, the president of Ave Maria University in Florida, who is defending Pope Francis in the clergy sex abuse allegations. And he has choice words for the pontiff's critics. The president of a Catholic university in Florida has issued a statement in defense of Pope Francis. He's denouncing former Vatican diplomat Carlo Vigano and the faithful who are calling for the Pope's resignation. The president of Ave Maria, which is a private Catholic liberal arts school founded in 2003, writes on its website, those so-called conservative Catholics who now challenge the Holy Father's legitimate authority and openly undermine his papacy are betraying their own principles and hurting the church they profess to love. They should stop now. And joining me by Skype is that President Jim Toohey, president of Ave Maria University. Mr. Toohey, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you.
Why did you feel you needed to write this statement?
Because it's not just a defense of Pope Francis, it's a defense of Peter, it's a defense of the chair. As faithful Catholics, I feel this university, Ave Maria University, has always stood by the Pope and by the Church through thick and thin. And so it's one thing to have dissenting views and to air those through appropriate channels, but I thought publicly calling for the Pope's resignation was crossing a line because it really hurts the body, hurts the Church, and it hurts Peter.
Who do you mean when you say so-called conservative Catholics?
Well, I think you can get really trapped in labels here. And so I was referring more to how culturally they're tagged. The reality is there are political conservatives and political liberals. Within the church, there are Orthodox individuals. So, you know, along the spectrum of Catholic conservative thought where Ave Maria University proudly is situated, I think those that are announcing as conservatives their desire for the Pope to step down have to think through the principle of that in terms of the papacy. We don't like it when people are airing dissent about John Paul II, about Pope Benedict XVI. And so I think we have to be careful when we go after this Pope.
The Cardinal Newman Society, whose stated mission is to promote and defend faithful Catholic education, tweeted that your statement, quote, unfairly attacks credible, faithful Catholic leaders who have rightly grown impatient with rampant infidelity. At least 2 regents of Ave Maria on Facebook are openly expressing their thoughts of resignation. What's your response to your critics?
Well, I think there needs to be a discussion in the church about how we clean up the mess that exists right now. And I put out a statement 5 days ago talking about the need for the laity to be involved, for the voice of women to be heard. It's a terrible scandal. The victims' cries have not been heard or honored. And so I'm all on board with the reforms that are needed. The question is, how do we go about doing it? And whenever you have a breach in unity between your bishops and the Pope, you're going to the heart of the church, and it hurts our Pope, it hurts the chair of Peter.
Would you support an independent investigation into the allegations mentioned in Vigano's letter, including an investigation into what Pope Benedict and Pope Francis knew and when they knew it?
I think you have to thoroughly investigate what happened around Cardinal McCarrick's situation. And I think Cardinal DiNardo has said that the bishops are going to do that. I think that's an appropriate step. What I think crosses the line is when the church is somehow split, where we almost seem to contemplate schism here over these issues. We have to be united. We have to work together. You know, we love our Pope. We love the church. Ave Maria University stands proudly by the Pope. And he's admitted his failures and mistakes here in his own handling of certain situations. And now we're pulling for him. I'm sure he's going to address this issue at the appropriate time. But I just think critics calling from within for his ouster, I don't think it's called for. And so I felt, as a good Catholic, this university can stand by the Pope and in support of him. But I do think the church needs to clean up this mess. And those that are critics of how the church have handled it, I'm standing right with them.
Jim Toohey, president of Ave Maria University. You can see that statement on its website. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Joining me now is Sean McMahon, who graduated from Ave Maria University in 2013 with a double major in politics, music, now works as an advisor to the chairman of the Conservative Partnership Institute. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks so much for having me.
You just heard the President Toohey stand by his letter. You have concerns. What are they?
I do. I think it's very disappointing to hear that President Toohey continues to stand by his statement. It also shows an ignorance of church history. One of the greatest doctors of the church, Catherine of Siena, openly criticized the Holy Father, called for his resignation if he didn't
leave the papacy in Avignon and come to Rome.
Correct. So there's a long history, and in fact, some of the greatest doctors of the church have done that. And I think, moreover, it's disappointing that he's bringing politics into the discussion of liberal versus conservative. I'm sure there's an element in there, but I think it's a far more serious of issue that the church has had a culture of abuse and of silence.
Father Brian Jerebick, Chancellor of the Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, writes this: as an alumnus of Ave Maria, I'm shocked to read this statement full of elementary political analysis. Pitiful. Do you agree that it is pitiful?
I do. And in fact, I think many of the alumni, current students, and members of the Ave Maria community are scratching our heads why President Toohey would issue this statement. There's rumors that he's potentially leaving the university, and this is
well, we don't want to get into rumors. Okay, I hear what you're saying. But the alumni, are they saying that this would influence their future contributions or involvement with the university?
Absolutely. I think there's been an unfortunate decline in the Catholicity of the university over the last 5 or so years of President Toohey's tenure. And I think this is once again another example of that.
If blanket support of the Pope, as President Toohey seems to be calling for, isn't the answer, what is?
I think it's an investigation. Look, I think one can question what the Holy Father knew and his actions without attacking the chair of Peter, as President Toohey suggested. The Holy Father himself has called for an open process and investigation, and unless we shine light into the darkness, this culture of cover-up and abuse will continue.
Sean McMahon, who graduated from Ave Maria University, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Up next here on EWTN News Nightly, a win for abortion advocates at state colleges and universities in California, and why it's getting a little old to buy a cup of coffee at this shop. In a unanimous decision, a Missouri federal appeals court dismisses a lawsuit from a satanic temple challenging the informed consent portion of a pro-life law. That law requires 72 hours before abortions are performed. It also says women should be offered an ultrasound and an opportunity to hear the baby's heartbeat. The complaint stated a woman's body is, quote, subject to her will alone. A measure that would make California the first state to require all public universities to offer abortion medication has cleared a hurdle. The state assembly has approved the measure, which returns to the Senate for a final sign-off. If approved, campus health centers at the state's 34 colleges would have the drugs by 2022. Private donors have agreed to pay millions of those dollars in startup costs. Tonight, Pro-Life Weekly features a group that pays women who are considering an abortion $3,000 to overcome initial financial challenges.
Think twice about before you want to get rid of your child. Like, it's people out here that's willing to help you. It's people, I just feel like no child should be aborted because financial reasons. It could be anything. Like, I didn't expect to get a second job when I did, so it just be like, I feel like abortion shouldn't be in at all.
Jasmine Stansel was inside an abortion clinic last October when she learned about these resources. The group is called Save Unborn Lives. You can see Catherine Hadrow's interview tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. And finally tonight, why going to this coffee shop in Mexico will get old. It's because it's run by people over the age of 60. Starbucks opened the shop, the first of its kind. It's part of Mexico's efforts to employ senior citizens, although I would argue that 60 is not a senior citizen. Inside, there are no stairs, and shelves are lower than at an average Starbucks. You could almost say this store has a latte going on. Sorry. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Keep in touch online, please. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn, EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.